Professors of Reddit, what were the worst papers that you had to grade? First year physics student fitted an entire 8-question assignment onto a single page of A4. So far, not so bad. If the university I recently moved to allowed students to hand in paper assignments. Nope. Everything must be scanned and uploaded to the online system. The university provides scanners and photocopiers in the library just for this reason. Student took a photo of the assignment with his mid-2000s flip phone in what I can only imagine was a concrete, windowless cell lit by a single, flickering light bulb. Uploaded the file as a low-res JPEG about 250x600px across. I also got one random assignment I had to send to IT to have the file converted from Ms. Publisher into something my computer could open. Last version of Publisher came out in 2012. I don't have access to the software. Had to email the student to have them resubmit because the equations they'd added got parsed as random but rectangles. Students now get that this is Camp Scanner and this is how to make a PDF talk. That sort of sounds like intentional obfuscation to buy time. In my AP Literature course, I was grading a paper from a student for whom a C would be an achievement. The first paragraph is fantastic. I'm impressed. The second paragraph, awful. The third is again written eloquently. The fourth is atrocious. I call the student to my desk after class, set his paper between us, and tell him I haven't googled anything yet, but if he'd like to tell me anything about the paper before I did, this was his opportunity. Yeah, I plagiarized a lot of it. Alright then. Hard to choose the worst, but here are a few that really made me scratch my head. I once had a student who said the biggest issue facing obese, male, children is that they have small penises. Not one of the issues, but the biggest issue. I suppose the risk of diabetes, heart disease, and the potential for issues with confidence and bullying pale in comparison to small genitalia in prepubescent males. In the same class, a student wrote that single women were at significant risk of contracting a sexually transmitted infection from masturbation. The student was in her 20s. For a glassblowing class my university has, so my school is very STEM focused, like 70% engineering majors, so there isn't a lot of artistic talent among us, but some people are really bad. So I had one guy who was struggling and no matter what I did he just wasn't getting it. His pieces were generally very small, sloppy, asymmetrical, etc. So for his final he hands in this beautiful vase, cool colors, symmetric, nice size and weight. Well, the professor was looking it over and giving her compliments except one problem. She had made it a few days before and it went missing from the shelf where we put pieces while we wait for people to pick them up. So the guy tries to turn in a piece made by the actual professor, TL. Dr. Guy tries to hand in a glass art piece, tries to pass it off as his own. Turn out the prof made it and he stole it and tried to give it back as his final. Worst was easily the essay on Columbia the university instead of Columbia the country. All essays opening with, since the dawn of time humans have, or similar such universals. Since the dawn of time humans have been confusing Columbia the university and Columbia the country. Definitely the one where the student copied and pasted several paragraphs from Wikipedia without bothering to change the formatting of the hyperlinks before printing it off. The name of the country is actually Chile in other languages, like in French for example. Maybe that is where it is from. I was teaching a college business writing class, and the end assignment was a formal report, 13 pages, on a topic currently affecting businesses. This student was the class clown, and he kinda panicked when he couldn't think of a topic. So, we discussed it in class, and we finally came up with a topic for him. The student turned in a 4-page report. One of the pages was a dispatch copied directly from the local transit authority discussing traffic conditions on a local highway. It had no bearing on the topic. The report also contained this immortal line: while the rest of the world is rightly concerned with this problem, America has not yet busted a sweat. I made a copy of the paper since I suspected that he would challenge his failing grade for the class. He did. I handed out copies of this paper to the review board, and his challenge failed. Actual professor here. I've taught a bunch of different classes that required essays. My favorites include a paper on Taoism, which was completely blank. It would have been cute had a dozen students not tried that before. I get it, but you still have to write the dang paper. The worst was in a composition class where a student asked for special permission to write her paper on her culture. I agreed, mostly so I would get to read something not on the same boring 5 topics I was forced to assign. The student turns in the rough draft and the paper is literally a copy-paste from a tourism website. So I turn the student in for a plagiarism violation. After trying to reach out to the student multiple times, guess what the student turns in for the final? The exact same paper. That's 2 plagiarism violations in one term in case anyone is counting. Needless to say, the student was given a 0 in my course and most likely expelled from the university. It sucks when you see instant improvement in a paper and then a paragraph later your plagiarism sense starts tingling and then by the next paragraph you have to go Google things. These are the pre-Turnitin drafts. Such a downer. And it's worse because so often the plagiarizer fits some awful stereotypes that are unfortunately based on reality. I teach IB in high school. The kids can earn college credit before graduating. The end of year exams are basically papers that need to be written in front of a proctor. As the proctor ended the examination, he said, "Now strike a line through anything you don't want the moderators to read and mark." This freaking kid proceeds to draw a line through every word he wrote. Former IB student. Can relate. Glad I never have to do those dang exams ever again. It wasn't so much one paper, but a series of them. I taught a class that was basically career development for students who were undeclared undecided majors, and included 6 papers and 2 personal presentations, which satisfied a writing requirement that all students needed. These were not true research papers, merely 4 5-page papers on personal exploration which anyone could browse. I knew it and they knew it. All you had to do was follow the rubric and show that you could write coherent sentences. And that brings me to one of the football players that was in my class. Sucker would never follow the rubric, ever. There were around 30 students in the class and I spent a great deal of time going through every single one and providing individual feedback on their writing skills, editing their papers, etc. One assignment could take me around 10-15 hours to get through for all of the students, and all of them improved their writing skills with said feedback over the course of the semester, except this sucker. So on his 4th paper of maybe 3rd grade level writing, and the same mistakes I had been correcting all semester, I wrote an entire paragraph in the middle of his paper indicating that I don't think he ever read his feedback and he could disprove this by coming to talk to me in class, or office hours, or email me. I put it in his 5th paper, and in the written feedback I provided for both of his presentations, and his 6th paper. Dude never came and talked to me or changed anything about his writing, and continued to disregard the rubric. Then had the nerve to get upset when he got the aka an F, as it would affect his overall GPA and therefore make him possibly ineligible. This ain't high school anymore, bro. That's what he called me at the end of the semester when he asked me to bump up his grade. I laughed. I was a teaching assistant back in grad school and taught 2nd semester introductory biology classes for majors. Anyway, our students had to write lab reports on an in-class experiment we did involving snails. One semester 2 students managed to misspell snail. One spelled it snail and the other spelled it snell. There are plenty of hard words to spell in biology, but snail is not one of them. I knew a man whose last name was Snell. He used to teach art. The last time I heard from him, he floated a couch down a river in Alaska. Also, he was living in a sauna floating in the bay during the time I knew him. If PowerPoint presentations count, I teach a postgraduate course in marketing and often ask students to give a 10-minute presentation on any subject related to marketing. I like it when students come up with something personal and original that I like learning about myself. One student gave a presentation about Nike and Roger Federer, which potentially is a great subject. However, the presentation was 50% about Federer's career and 50% about how he needed special shoes due to previous injuries. He did not bring up anything related to marketing. For example, how Federer was a great celebrity endorser for the brand. In fact, he seemed to believe that the co-branded shoes were primarily made for Federer because he needed special shoes, not for regular Nike customers. It was all a trick. You have been targeted by Roger Federer's marketing agent. Tay chiming in here. I TA'd for those pointless orientation courses people had to take their first semester in undergrad. That class was set up to be an easy A, to give them confidence and introduce them to how things work at the college, grading, policy, and how to just survive undergrad. Students were given simple assignments like a 2-page autobiography and 1-page reflections on the topics we were discussing in class. For their autobiography, I had one student give me something that was barely a half-page of incoherent rabble. Some typos were so bad it looked like they typed by smashing their face into the keyboard. Another student turned in a reflection paper that was supposed to be on a current political issue either nationally or globally. The paper was instead on their favorite sport, which they misspelled. I had another student that decided to not turn in any of the papers he had to do until the day after the semester ended. I looked at only one of those papers. It looked like he threw words on the page an hour before he sent them to me. That paper along with the rest of them immediately went into the trash. The bright note is that I didn't have the student that tried to plagiarize their own autobiography. It's never a good idea to copy-paste the opening paragraph of a professional athlete's Wikipedia page and act like it's your own life story. Another tale here. I was grading a student's paper regarding the tales of the Haker, and while it was a fine enough paper in content, it was incredibly informal. I can't remember the line verbatim, but the one that took the cake was readers can agree that Mariniga was kind of a dong. I was pretty shocked. Regardless, the student did fairly well. It may not have been the worst I've ever graded, but it makes for a good story. I did that once. Got on a tangent and left a certain so Benito Mussolini was a butthole in a history essay. That teacher and I shared many laughs. I will visit him and bring this up. I try to forget all the worst papers, but a few really mind-boggling cases of plagiarism have stuck in my memory. A few years ago I held a master's class for foreign exchange students, many of them from South Asia. They all had top scores on their TOEFL tests, but they could not complete a sentence in English and they could not utter a word in response to even the simplest of questions. They were clearly not used to be asked questions in any language, as they were perplexed by the whole situation. The course papers that they handed in were obviously not written by them, and they clearly had nothing whatsoever to do with the topic of the course, organizational theory. It was UN white papers, a few journal articles and the odd popular science piece. What surprised me the most was their reaction when I, naturally, failed them. They were shocked and outraged. They explained that this was how they always write papers, and they had in their mind fulfilled the requirements of the class. They had showed up to most lectures, although often late. They had been sitting in silence, not understanding a word of what was being said, and that was apparently what was usually required of them to get a good grade. I do not think they were really bad in a malicious way. They were genuinely surprised that they had not done well. No a prof, but a T. I was a T in a first year math course called Introduction to Group Theory. In one of the HW sheets, it was needed to prove that two groups, denoted S3 and D6, were equal. One student turned in a solution, starting with the words, "We'll first prove that the group S3 is equal, and later prove that D6 is also equal," followed by about 3 pages of the mathematical equivalent of pure gibberish. Whoa, I don't know the first thing about group theory, but that's still freaking funny. That's when you know you've really fricked up. I was a T in college, and while none of the assignments I had to grade were particularly egregious, there was one story that one of my T friends told me that really stuck out. He was a T for a large lecture course that served as an introduction to engineering. Useful if you knew you wanted to engineer but not what kind, or if you were looking for engineering organizations to join. They were a big intro class, so they used automatic cheating detection software. Everyone's papers would come back as a few % plagiarized, which is normal. Things like attributed quotes or restating the prompt would set off the system and quickly be dismissed by the grader. The real issue would be if your paper is like 95% plagiarized, or in this guy's case a perfect 0% plagiarized. That's basically impossible to do, except with an empty document. But this guy had submitted something. The grader opened the document and found that it was full of typed paragraphs that were on topic. He went to select some text to check it and found that it wouldn't select. The student had copied a large section of work off of a website and pasted into Word. Then they had taken a screenshot and pasted that into another document that they submitted. It was especially bad because this was a paper on ethics. They didn't pass. It's bad, but man, that is creative. Prof here, my favorite paper wasn't necessarily the worst, it was just the most baffling. My students had to write an essay on whether graffiti had to be vandalism to be an art form. Needless to say, this is a somewhat difficult concept for some students, especially those with an ESL background. One such young woman didn't quite understand what I was going for and sat with me during office hours. I tried to explain it to her with a few examples. For instance, do you think, for instance, the crude drawings of penises on a bathroom stall are examples of art? What about scribbles on a wall? If not, then why not? Alternately, do you think a beautiful mural criticizing a Walmart on an actual Walmart would still be artistically impactful if you took it out of its contexts and instead put it in a gallery? Anyway, we discussed her perceptions on art and how she felt about these examples. She left feeling much more focused and I felt good to have helped. 2 weeks later I get a copy of her essay. It was titled Are Penises Art? The essay was a very well researched and in-depth analysis of penis art throughout history. There were pictures, and a whole historical analysis about dongs and balls as depicted in artwork. Her search history is still no doubt eroding her computer from within. There was nothing related to the original question, but the essay was so odd and so out of nowhere and brought me so much joy that I passed it. I'm glad you passed it. She didn't fail at art, but rather English. Not sure if it's relevant, but I'm a French teacher. One paper I had, the student clearly hadn't studied, so when the question asked them what they want to be in the future, one student wrote, and I quote, I grave want et bear cute hydre sere. I died a bit that day. Hon hon hon. One of my former students liked to digress in his essays. I especially remember one, in which, out of nowhere, he wrote, people are just too tolerant. This is why there are many perverts, lesbians, and other Pokemons. That fact made me so sick yesterday I had to take some pills. Needless to say, English is his second language. By the way, the theme of the assignment was the most influential person in your life. I can't wait to catch a pervert and lesbian in Sun and Moon. Not even remotely a professor, and not entirely related to the question. But it's been a long night standing watch and I have a funny story to share. I moved to the States from Russia when I was 13. Didn't speak any English when I moved. Needless to say, the first year in high school was a bit rough. Well, my school required taking a foreign language every year and, luckily for me, they taught Russian. So, my freshman year I was in the advanced junior class. All I did was basically help the teacher grade papers and such. There are endless examples of funny crap I had to figure out in their essays. The first one was a basic paper requiring to describe your hobbies, and it's actually a bit difficult to explain. This kid basically wrote I love to clock dinner man boxes. At first I was clueless, but then slowly pieced it together. Just a lazy way to use an English to Russian dictionary. A watch that you wear on your wrist and watch as in watch a movie are two different, unrelated words in Russian. And the word for clock and watch is the same. Chazzy, dinner man? Seems like he looked up super but skipped a bit too far to supper. So, Superman. Boxes? Took me a second. But carton is korobka in Russian. A box. So, once again he didn't quite reach cartoons and was satisfied with cartons. Anyways, reading all this back sounds underwhelming now. I'm just gonna go watch some Superman cartoons. Ah, Russian. What a beautiful, complicated language. This happened while I was in grad school studying architecture. I was there to sit on a panel and review some of the undergraduate students' work. The way architecture works is that there are very few exams or papers, and instead they are graded based on one very large project that the students pin up on a wall at the end of the year. They give a presentation and defend their work while the panel gives criticism. So myself and the rest of the panel were reviewing the undergrad projects when we got to this one particular student. There was barely any work put up on his wall, only a few badly done paintings and a few plans that were completely incoherent. My general rule for crits is to be as gentle and nice as possible when it comes to giving negative feedback. However, I could not think of a way to say anything nice. Luckily, I didn't have to speak up. A professor on the panel just sighed loudly and said to the student, "Take this off the wall. It doesn't deserve to be up here. Your work is a disgrace and you will never be an architect." He failed the student right then and there, in front of everyone, and made the student take his work off of the wall and out of the gallery. Architecture school is a lot of work. The students drive themselves mad with the amount of time and research they do when preparing a project. The lack of effort put forth by that particular student was embarrassing and was frankly an insult to his peers. He thought that his work was passable, and it was definitely not. TLDR. Student presented terrible, incoherent work at final review for architecture. His professor failed him and made him take his work off the wall in front of his whole class and told him he would never be an architect. I teach a course on law, society and technology to software engineers. Students are assigned an essay where they have to write about how new technology has interacted with law or society, with the idea being to try to take a technology and think about how the specific technical details have had an impact in a balanced way. I let students choose topics and as a result I get some really interesting ones, like talking about how social media led to the Arab Spring but also eventually proved inadequate to support it because of the relative lack of security on those platforms, or how peer-to-peer technology has affected copyright law. On the other hand, I've had to grade several papers written on Gamagat. One stands out because it talked about the problems feminism and SJWs were causing for the development of new technology and science in general. The student suggested that scientific progress can only be made by men because women can't do maths. Source: YouTube. That the entire independent gaming industry was controlled by feminists who had used their wiles, not joking that's the term, to infiltrate the controlling roles in the industry. Source: YouTube. And that feminism has killed more people than communism. Source: YouTube. In fact, all the sources were YouTube. I would be worried if he provided a more reputable source. Not really a paper, but before, when I used to teach Comp C, now a systems engineer, we had a class on programming. One of the students, whose name is Mo, decided to turn in his final project masterpiece. The premise of the project was simple: design and build an application as discussed in our lectures. The guy comes in and brings an installer for Minecraft, insisting that he was the one who built it and designed it. Mojang, aka Mo's company. Shortly after, he was given 0, expelled, and attempted to sue the university. It goes without being said that the lawsuit was thrown out, and Mocraft was never made. Professor here. I was grading an assigned project. Got halfway through grading the assignments and had only given A's and B's. I got to one assignment where the student clearly had no idea what they were doing. They obviously didn't pay attention to the lessons telling them exactly what to do. Gave the student a 30. The rest of the papers were A's and B's. Until the last one. It was the same exact awful work as the other student with a 30. When questioned, the one student's response, verbatim: "Professor, I didn't cheat. I just gave the other student my assignment." Yes, there were Chinese students at an American university. We had the same problem with Chinese students in law school. As a latte, it's a big deal when students cheat, but it's hard to address it when they don't see anything wrong. I had a letter mailed to my office, as in paid postage etc, that was basically threatening me, saying I better stop handing out C's and D's or word on the street was going to be that I was a bad teacher and no one would take my class and I'd be out of a job. I had a pretty good idea of who it was, obviously immediately ruled out all the students doing well in my classes, but didn't think direct accusations would be really effective anyway. I decided to take it to each of my 3 classes and turn it into a lesson on faulty rhetoric. My expectations were exceeded when I began to read the letter out loud, and without fail each class erupted in laughter and exclaimed things like "what" and "butthole" before I could even weigh in. The kid I suspected the most definitely sat slumped in his chair without much to say that day. Love the educational tactic. I remember when I was around 11 or 12 we had a 20-question science test every Friday at school. We had to mark each other's answers while the teacher read them out. One week, we had the question, what is the chemical formula for water? The kid whose test I was marking put electricity as their answer. I had a student who went home for the weekend and someone broke in and attacked her while she was sleeping, and when she ran downstairs a man shot and killed both of her parents who were running to help. She wanted to come back to school, so I let her do abbreviated coursework, and instead of a final exam I let her write an essay using one of the theories we covered, sociology course. She wrote about how the police and other people treated her like a criminal following the crime and a lot of the like and dealing with the aftermath of it all in her community and family. The whole situation was very heartbreaking. They did end up catching the individual a few years later. I've kept in touch with her through Facebook and she's doing great now. I'm not a teacher, but I think my story fits. I went to a Christian high school. In anatomy and physiology class I sat next to the big, dumb jock, Mark. The last question was, what is the only 100% effective form of contraception? The answer was obviously abstinence, as it was a Christian school, but Mark was visibly struggling with this question. By this time, most of the students had finished and I was trying to see if he would figure it out. The teacher noticed and tried to help without giving him the answer. After several attempts his final answer was, no balls. The concluding paragraph was YOLO. Not even you only live once. Just YOLO. It was a philosophy paper. I wasn't even mad. I take it wasn't about Nietzsche. High school history class in France. The topic of the 2 hours exam was internal population migrations in the US in the 1960s, with some stats provided to comment on. The core of the expected answer was to justify the observed migrations by the South, relative economic decline and employment in the West and North being fueled by the booming industry. A very left-leaning student, having reminiscences of having studied the US Civil War in English 1860s, made her whole argument around the liberation of slaves in the 1960s, leaving the plantations and going to look for work in the less racist North. She happily inserted references to Martin Luther King and Lincoln speeches to mix stuff up a tad more. In her paper, the Civil War and the Civil Rights movements were completely intertwined. The Civil War and the Civil Rights movements were completely intertwined. I mean, they are in the philosophical, political, and historical sense, but not chronologically. Had she made the argument that the way things were handled in the South during and after the Civil War eventually led to the internal migrations in the 1960s, that would have been a pretty good paper. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.